Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihare. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihare. Gopi Jana Balava Giri Bharadhare. Gopi Jana Balava Giri Bharadhare. Yashodanandana Vraja Janaranjana. Yashodanandana Vraja Janaranjana. Yamunatira Vanachare. Yamunatira Vanachare. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihare. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihare. Gopi Jana Balava Giri Bharadhare. Gopi Jana Balava Giri Bharadhare. Yashodanandana Vraja Janaranjana. Yashodanandana Vraja Janaranjana. Yamunatira Vanachare. Yamunatira Vanachare. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihare. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihare. Jai Prabhupada, Jai Prabhupada, Jai Prabhupada, Jai Prabhupada. Prabhupada Jai, Prabhupada Jai, Prabhupada Jai, Prabhupada. Jai Prabhupada, 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 Prabhupada. Jai Jai Prabhupada, 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 Prabhupada. Jai Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivrajacharya Tadasasi Samad. His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki. ISKCON's founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki. Shri Shri Radha Radhanath Ki. Shri Giri Govardhan Ki. Sankirtan Yagya Ki. Go Premanande. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 4, Chapter 2. Daksha curses Lord Shiva. Text 34. Te Pi Vishva Srija Satram Sahasra Parivatsaran Samvidhaya Maheshvasa Yatreja Rishabho Hari Tepi Vishvasrija Satram Sahasra Parivatsaran Samvidhaya Maheshvasa Yatreja Rishabho Hari Tepi Vishvasrija Satram Sahasra Parivatsaran Samvidhaya Maheshvasa Yatreja Rishabho Hari Tepi Vishvasrija Satram Sahasra Parivatsaran Samvidhaya Maheshvasa Yatreja Rishabho Hari
Sahasra Parivatsara Samvidyaya Ayeshvasya Yaksheja Rishabho Hari Devi Vishwas Vijashatram Shastra Paritvatsaram
Sahasra Parivatsaram Samvidhaya Maheshvasa Yatrija Rishabho Hari. Mataji's.
Devi Vishwasvijasatram Sahasra Parivatsaram Samvidaya Maheshvasa Yatrija Rishabho Hari Devi Vishwasvijasatram
Sahasra Parivatsaram Samvidhaya Maheshvasa Yatrija Rishabho Hari.
Devi Vishwasvijasatram
Sahasra Parivatsaram
Samvidaya Maheshvasa Yatrija Rishabho Hari
Te, those, api, even, Vishvasrija, progenitors of the universal population, Satram, the sacrifice, Sahasra, 1,000, Parivatsaran, years, Samvidhaya, performing, Maheshvasa, Ovadura, Yatra, in which, Ijya, to be worshipped, Rishabha, the presiding deity of all demigods, Hari, Hari. Translation. The sage Maitreya continued, Ovadura, all the progenitors of the universal population, thus executed a sacrifice for thousands of years. For sacrifice is the best way to worship the Supreme Lord Hari, the personality of Godhead. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. It is clearly stated here that the stalwart personalities who generate the entire population of the world are interested in satisfying the Supreme Personality of Godhead by offering sacrifices. The Lord also says in Bhagavad Gita 5:29, Bhoktaram yagyatapasam, one may engage in performing sacrifices and severe austerities for perfection, but they're all meant to satisfy the Supreme Lord. If such activities are performed for personal satisfaction, one is involved in pashanda, or atheism. But when they're performed for the satisfaction of the Supreme Lord, one is following the Vedic principles. All the assembled sages performed sacrifices for 1,000 years. Tepi Vishvasrija Satram Sahasra Parivatsaran Samvidaya Maheshvasa Yatrejya Rishabho Hari. The sage Maitreya continued, Ovadura, all the progenitors of the universal population, thus executed a sacrifice for thousands of years. For sacrifice is the best way to worship the Supreme Lord, Hari, the personality of Godhead. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Presta Bhutale Shrimati Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane, Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharane, Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pastya Chadeshtarne. Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Sri Advaita Gadadha Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktavrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripa sindubhya evacha. Patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. So, now we're just by the end of the chapter. And, of course, we all know very well what has happened. It's been such a story. It's really amazing. And all these heavy and aggressive emotions and all this anger and dissatisfaction in the extreme. And, you know, we may well have forgotten that they're meant to do a fire sacrifice. So as it turned out, those who were left did a fire sacrifice, did the planned fire sacrifice, but without the presence of these two very important personalities. At least one, Daksha, was the sort of the sponsor, or it was, so to speak, his sacrifice. He was the organizer and whatever, the one who, I assume, paid for it all. So you could say it was his sacrifice, but he had gone. He had gone because he felt so extremely insulted, offended, just bitterly upset by the fact that Lord Shiva particularly didn't stand up to offer him respect. And you must know, I mean, we've mentioned this, it's tongue-in-cheek, but it's true, that if when you enter a room, some person doesn't stand up to offer you respect, and if you become really angry, then you're in Maya. And you must really take a look at yourself and really try to see what's going on within you. Yes. In Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna, at the beginning of the 14th chapter, describes, 14th chapter, 16th chapter, describes godly qualities of a person, and one godly quality is tolerance. And in the purport, Srila Prabhupada gives an example. What is tolerance? What sort of activity could we call a tolerant activity? And Srila Prabhupada says tolerance means to tolerate the minor offenses of others. It's a very nice definition that we can try to remember. I think it's well worth trying to remember. Of course, what's a minor offense and what's a major offense? Well, as we've also said just a little while ago, if you're really fixed in Krishna consciousness, if you're really trying to chant nicely and cultivate the mood of Trinada Pisa Nichena, Tarorapi Sahishnuna, the mood of humility, then if someone insults you, well, then you'll become so empowered and enriched in a mood of humility and tolerance that even if someone tells you that, you're something bad, then you won't really be touched by it. At least internally, you won't feel that type of anxiety or bitterness as Daksha did. But rather, you may be able to tell the person that, you're trying your best to insult me, but actually I'm much worse than what you're saying. What you're saying is sort of amusing. You think you're hurting me? This takes a little advancement in Krishna consciousness, not too much, but some. So unfortunately, as we've seen very vividly, and it's been discussed so much over the last couple of weeks or 3 weeks or so, Daksha unfortunately didn't have that qualification, and so therefore he felt so extremely offended. What at least I've heard described as a type of mentality when there's a group of people and maybe one or a couple of them have offended you or done something you didn't appreciate, but you just allow yourself to get so affected by it, then you may manifest a type of mentality they call a these people mentality. These people. Like, real classic example is actually, it's coming up, isn't it? Later. Is it coming up? Anyway, it's coming up sooner or later. Somewhere. It's coming up that Dhruva's coming up after a few chapters. Dhruva Maharaj's his brother, was killed by a yaksha. And somehow Dhruva got so, even though he's a great devotee already at that point, he had been through his whole experience, culminating in meeting the Lord, but still somehow, when his brother was murdered by a yaksha, he just got so overcome with anger and just a mood of vengeance. In other words, the mood of these people. He decided to kill all the yakshas, and he tried to. At least he started until Swayambhuva Manu intervened and preached to him, and then he stopped. So, Daksha got into a real these people type of mentality. Sometimes it happens amongst devotees. I've seen it happen on a number of occasions. Someone gets offended or something like offended by a devotee, and suddenly all the devotees become the targets for the person's anger. These people. The karmis are better than these people. So this, of course, this is Maya. This is really Maya. It's just like anyone who's thinking like that is really sick from the spiritual point of view. So anyway, that was Daksha. On one side, he just felt that these people, it is beneath me to associate with these people. I'm just getting away from these people, so he did. And as we just read yesterday, Lord Shiva, he did not exactly immediately go, but after these curses had been exchanged for a minute or two or whatever, something like that, then Daksha left. Not that he was thinking, these people, but he just felt there's just too much inauspiciousness here. And therefore, and it's all about me. So therefore, he just quietly left. But his followers, they left with him also. So all the anger and all that just broke up. So then, those who are left, particularly the Brahmins, the progenitors of the universal population, so all the Prajapatis who were there except for Daksha, they all stayed on and engaged the Brahmins in doing the planned sacrifice for the benefit of the universal population. And it was a real maha sacrifice. Thousands of years. Thousands of years. And these people were just so expert, incredibly expert. They could chant the mantras. I mean, many mantras. How many mantras for thousands of years? They could chant those mantras without making any mistake of pronunciation or that sort of thing. I just read yesterday, here's a confession. It's not a confession, but sort of. I read some news thing. I forget what it was. I mean, what the website was. But 1,500 people were baptized in the last, just very recently. But the priest got one word wrong. And so they're all going to be re-baptized. Okay, Hare Krishna. I remember, at least I remember being told when I sort of first arrived within the first couple of months, and I was visiting the tent campaign every few weeks or so, and the tent campaign, not the devotees on the tent campaign were telling me that sometimes the priests in Durban, when they do a fire sacrifice, first of all, they don't use, some really auspicious wood. They use, the devotees told me, tomato boxes. And sometimes they can't get ghee, so they use sunflower oil. Haribol. I don't know what the result would be. If a couple is married, a wedding ceremony using sunflower oil, I don't know. At the end, I don't know if they're really married or not. Anyway, whatever. But there's so much going on which is not to be taken seriously. But even we'll see it when we get to the 6th canto after a few years, that, who was it? Vishvakarma did a fire yagya because his son Vishvarupa, had been killed by Lord Indra. And so he did a fire yajna from which he wanted to produce a son from the fire, produce a person who could kill Indra for revenge. And such a person would be Indra Shatroho, according to Sanskrit grammar. You get what's called Visarga, which means like, I'm sure you've seen AH, but there's a dot under the H at the end. Or OH, and there's a dot under the H at the end of a word. Are you with me? Yeah, you should be, yeah. So that's Visarga. And so that means the last syllable is aha, and not just ah. It's aha or aho. And in this case, it was Indra Shatraho. Indra, of course, is Indra, and Shatra means enemy. It's a nice way, a cultured way of saying that this person can kill, in this case, Indra Shatra. This person will be the enemy of Indra. But he mispronounced, whoever was doing the yajna, instead of Indra Shatroho, which would mean he would be the enemy of Indra, he mispronounced and just said Indra Shatro, without the Visarga, without the sort of doubling of the O. And when it's just Indra Shatro, it means that this person will be Indra's enemy. Yeah. Not the enemy of Indra, which is a nice way of saying he can kill Indra, but Indra's enemy, which means he can be killed by Indra. And that's what happened. From the fire came Vritrasura, and even though it was very close, and at one point it looked like he might well kill Indra, but because of the shortcoming in the pronunciation, he was killed by Indra. That's what happened. So, anyway, that's sort of by the way, really. But of course, one point is that we should, when we chant Hare Krishna and everything else we chant, we should try and do it nicely, because it all has meaning. And particularly Hare Krishna Mahamantra, Sri Krishna Chaitanya, etc., all these main mantras that we chant, the personalities being addressed are present in the mantras. And you are sort of manifesting the form of the person within the sound vibration that you're producing. And if your sound vibration is missing something, then the person may be missing, I don't know, an arm or a leg or something. But seriously, it matters. It matters. It really matters. Anyway, the point here, though, is that those who were left carried on with the sacrifice for thousands of years. And they just did it so nicely for thousands of years with no mistakes. And using, I think it's aranya wood, is it? Some special type of wood that they use for those fire sacrifices, and ghee. So in the purport, Srila Prabhupada's focusing on the point of the the value, the importance of sacrifices, of offering sacrifices to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And Prabhupada refers to and quotes the first line of Bhagavad Gita chapter 5 verse 29, Bhoktaram yagyatapasam sarvaloka maheshwaram suridam sarvabhutanam. So, Gyatvamam Shantim Richati. So it's Krishna's sort of defining himself in a sense. Who is Krishna? Krishna saying, who am I? I'm Bhoktaram Yagatapasam. I'm the one who enjoys the results of all sacrifices and austerities. Or in other words, I, Krishna, should be the one. I should be the one that enjoys all the fruits or results, the performance of all austerities and sacrifices. And if anyone does some austerity or some sacrifice, which is not for the pleasure of Krishna, then it's invalid. And the result will not be at least it will not be what it should be or could be. And we find, it's interesting in Bhagavad Gita, in the 3rd chapter, in the 3rd chapter of Bhagavad Gita, in verse 10, Sahayagya prajashishtva Puravacha Prajapati Anena Prashavishyadvam Esha Vost Vishta Kamaduk. In the beginning of creation, the Lord of all creatures sent forth generations of men and demigods, along with sacrifices for Vishnu, and blessed them by saying, be thou happy by this yajna, sacrifice, because its performance will bestow upon you everything desirable for living happily and achieving liberation. So like this, we should have this sort of foundational understanding of what is this material world. Of course, some people think this material world, what is it? It is a place like a great field of enjoyment, a place where there's so many facilities for enjoying sense gratification, material enjoyment. That's what it's for. And either they may think that God has provided it as such. God has provided it so we can enjoy. Others, more like Mayavadis or that sort of person, impersonal type people, they may feel, so many of them do feel, that it's like this world is a prison house. It's a place of suffering. Whatever you do, it produces some bad results. Yeah, there's the impersonalists and people like that. They feel like that. But the devotees understand, as Maitreya is telling Vidura here, that it's really a place to please the personality of Godhead in the best way possible. And its sacrifice is the best way to worship the Supreme Lord. And when you worship the Supreme Lord, then as that other verse we just read, chapter 3, verse 10, as that verse says, then we'll be able to live very nicely for the time being, and at the end of this lifetime, go back to Godhead. That's what the world is designed for. Yes. And just like people can have mistaken ideas what something is meant for, what I should do with some item. Sometimes I've heard the example given at least, that someone who doesn't understand what is a microphone, they may think it's sort of like a small club, something like that. You could whack people with it. And you could. And I'm sure it's been done before. Yes. So, so you can get some enjoyment in this world. It's very limited, but it's something. Yes. And of course, in a certain sense, this world is a prison house. If you don't know what to do with it, then you just get caught up in so much unpleasantness. But actually, it's designed. What it's designed for, what its purpose is, as given by the designer, is it's a great place for sacrifice, for living happily in the meantime, and in the end, going back to Godhead. So therefore we find in Sri Ishopanishad, right in the beginning, that Ishavasyam idam sarvam, that everything is owned and controlled by the Lord. And everyone must just take their quota and not take someone else's, and engage their quota in the service of the Lord. And then the next verse says that if you live like this, then you can go on living for hundreds of years. Not necessarily that your lifespan will be extended, but you can go on life after life if you live like that, recognizing the Ishavasya principle. And you'll be happy in the material world if you live like that. And you won't necessarily feel that I must get out of here. And as we know, Lord Chaitanya said, we recite Shikshastakam, Mama Janmani Janmanishvare, Bhavatad Bhakti Arahaita Ki Twai, that what do I want? Na Janam, Na Dhanam, Na Sundarim, so many material things I don't want. So what do you want? Just unmotivated, pure devotional service, life after life. And Narottam Das Thakur sings in the same way. All I want to do is associate with the devotees, serve the devotees, birth after birth. And he's not feeling like, I must get out of here, it's too difficult, it's too bad. So if one, as Prabhupada's explaining here, if one lives according to the principle of sacrifice for Krishna, then one can go on indefinitely, and one will be happy. Even though birth and death are there, one will be able to pass through these things without difficulty and live happily in Krishna consciousness. But not if you do those things for your personal sense gratification. Hare Krishna. Any comment or question? commentators are not here today. Okay? Srila Prabhupada ki jai.